creation derived from the Ten Commandments, or are the two documents exact opposites? We'll answer that question right now on the Atheist Forum. You are about to enter the no superstition zone of rational thinking and intellectual curiosity here on the Atheist Forum. Standing by for your questions or comments at 727-441-3000, where you can talk to a real live atheist here on Tan Talk 1340. It's really an urban legend commonly expressed in this country that we are a Christian nation and all of our rights, liberties, laws, and our very democratic system of government is somehow derived from Christianity and its Bible. It's even heard stated that our Constitution is derived entirely from the Ten Commandments. Well, these notions subscribe to the adage that the more times a lie is repeated, the more likely it is to be believed. Those of us in the community of reason can only conclude that whoever believes that has never read either the Bible or the Constitution, more likely neither of those documents.
Indeed.
Ed Golly with Jim Peterson, Tracy Thomas, and Los, excuse me, Los Lugosi in the studio on the Tan Talk radio network to straighten out this mythology. Jim, wouldn't you agree that a starting point we can launch from is to establish a distinct difference between the Constitution with its Bill of Rights embodied in the Ten Amendments and the Ten Commandments by merely appraising the names of these documents, rights established in the Constitution as opposed to commandments established in the Bible?
Yes, I think that's pretty apparent already just in the words themselves. Commandments are generally issued from the top down to the troops, whereas rights are something claimed by the majority of those observing them. And rights are something that we, the American people, invented. And we're constantly at it. The process of historical development has enabled us to develop all kinds of rights that our ancestors never knew existed, because many of them grew out of the kinds of changes that we can expect as our culture goes forward. And tonight I'd like to take a little time and review some of the commandments. But before that, I think Tracy has something to say.
Yeah, I just wanted to make the comment that I've said this before, and I've heard it before, that not only was this country not based on the Christian religion, it is the secular experiment. It's only 200 years old, but it's purely a secular experiment. It was the intention of our founders to remove ourselves, remove the country, remove the government from religion in order to have a secular way of living. Mm-hmm. And when I hear people say that it was based on Christian fundamentals, it's just insane to me. I don't understand how they could forget that this is not a Christian government; it's a secular government. And this is we don't have city halls of worship. We have city halls of law and governance. Yeah. We don't have schools of worship. We have schools of learning.
And if the Ten Commandments was the basis for the Constitution, why bother to write a Constitution, right? They just would have said, well, it's already figured out. Yeah, all the rules are written. We don't need to do anything except abide by the commandments. But in fact, they did just the opposite and expressed it most, I think, completely in the very first one of the Bill of Rights that says that the government won't make any law respecting an establishment of religion. That made it very clear that they didn't intend for the country to be a theocracy. Otherwise, that first sentence in the First Amendment would have been, Congress will establish the United States as a Christian theocracy, and all laws, rules, regulations, and governance will be based on what's defined by Christianity or in its Bible. They did just the opposite.
That's a great point you just brought up, Ed, because a lot of the constitutions that are out there that are based on some sort of a religious background do in fact state that this is founded as part of a God's plan or some sort of a religious foundation, but the word God nowhere appears in the U.S. Constitution or any of the 27 amendments.
So what the
nowhere.
What the conservatives typically do is reach back to the Declaration of Independence, which of course is never a basis for any legal decision or any law in the country. It was just a letter to a king saying we're jumping ship.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jim.
Well, the Constitution obviously is addressed at the individuals who constructed it, that is, the citizenry. And those rights which are established in our Constitution, our secular Constitution, are addressed to the individual citizens themselves, not to any higher authority. Church officials, priests, bishops, ministers, etc., are citizens just like the rest of us, but no more than that as far as the Constitution is concerned. A lot of people seem to accept that our laws are based on the morals of the Old Testament, as laid out in the commandments. But I think it would be worth our while to take a look at these things and compare them to our actual laws, as well as the Constitution, the legal document framed by the fathers, which our laws are, to see which of these our laws are actually based. For those of you not familiar with the Bible, which includes many politicians, most willing to thump it,
Most evangelicals
it seems
apparently
what
also.
follows is the relevant passage from Exodus 20 in the King James Version. I found it online at the University of Michigan's Digital Library. Noteworthy, God said some other stuff interspersed with the command, sort of legal commentary, to stress the aspects he felt important. And among other things, these are the Ten Commandments. I am the Lord thy God, which have brought thee out of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. Thou shalt have no gods before me. And you're familiar, somewhat familiar, I'm sure, with most of the rest of these. And I won't reiterate them too much because we're going to look at them one at a time. The first one being, I am the Lord thy God, thou shalt have no other gods before me. Well, that seems to be clear enough. Obviously, God is saying he's the only one, and all other religions that have other gods or other versions of the one God are wrong.
Well, now, see, I would contest that.
Would you?
That means that he acknowledged that there are other gods and says you can't obey any of them, you've got to acknowledge me.
And he's obviously jealous of them as well.
Yes. So
Wouldn't you be?
There's been 20,000 gods we can document easily throughout history. And he's saying, no, they're all the wrong gods. I'm the right one. Right? So, it's a clear acknowledgement, and as I interpreted, that there were so many gods running around that he had to say, well, if you acknowledge any of those other gods, off with your head. It's a capital crime.
Well, of course, at the time that this God issued his commandments to the Israelite tribe, why each of the other tribes around, and there were hundreds, if not thousands of them throughout the Middle East, they all had their own gods.
Exactly.
So consequently...
So not only was it off with your head... It was off with everybody's head.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Sure.
Entire communities.
There's some pretty good examples in the Bible that actually underscored that. Where basically just entire tribes were wiped out because God was jealous of their gods and told people to go in there and just kill those people because they're not worthy.
Well, Loss, don't forget, he actually killed everybody in the world according to the mythology, except one old drunk and 8 members of his family because they didn't do what he wanted, right? And then the world's repopulated, supposedly with people that'll follow the rules. But no, everybody's still a sinner, so it didn't accomplish anything. The idiot killed everybody and everything and all animals, puppy dogs, bunny rabbits, children, killed them all to straighten them out, and then the new generation comes along, they're just as bad.
But didn't the stock for the new generation come from the old stock? Because that's like taking a bushel of apples that has gone bad, taking a bad apple out of it, putting it into the new bushel of apples, and expecting it to flourish.
Well, not only that, but God is all-knowing, so he knew that was going to happen.
He would have known that was going to happen. It would have been a waste of time. Now, Jim, we're going to go, as you said, we're going to go through these, but one thing I want to point out as we review these is that actually only 2 of the 10 commandments are commandments. The rest of them are all restrictions. Now, they could have been rewritten as commandments, like the first one we've just been talking about, but it restricts you from believing in other gods. It could have been written to say, thou shalt only believe in me. You are commanded to believe only in me, or I'll kill you. But only 2 are actual commandments, and the rest are restrictions. So the document should be called the 10 Restrictions with a couple commandments mixed in. And those, of course, are, I think, 4 and 5 and 6, or 4 and 5. Doesn't matter. But that's what's really interesting about it. And when we contrast that with the Bill of Rights, we see that the Bill of Rights is restrictions placed on those who are given the power to govern us. They can't stop us from saying whatever we want to say, publishing what we want to publish, protesting them when we want to, and so on. So there couldn't be more diametrically opposed documents,
right? And
somehow the Christers and the religionists say that, no, they're exactly the same. Go ahead,
And
Jim.
speaking of which, if we look at that at the First Amendment, the opening is that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Right away, we have a problem. That's the very first thing laid out in the Bill of Rights, and I mean the very first sentence. Congress shall make no law restricting the establishment of religion. What this says to me, and it's pretty clear about it, is that we cannot make laws saying this God or that God to the God. Not only that, if you want to worship a God, any God, you have the legal right to do so under our Constitution. Clearly, this is the very first right of all Americans, and it is in direct contradiction to the very first commandment sent down by God. So people saying our laws are based on the 10 Commandments must never have gotten to the first one of the 10. I guess they got to Exodus 19 and stopped. So at this point, there are no points being issued for the notion that our Constitution is based in any kind of religion.
Right. The government is restricted from establishing this as
That's right.
a Christian nation or a Jewish or a Muslim or any religion at all being established as the religion of the land.
As we've noted so often, your choice of belief is a matter of your perception, your ideas, the way you interact with the world, and it's your business, not the government's.
And Laos, don't you think that it's because of established religions in the Middle East that there's so much conflict over there?
100%.
100%.
When you have multiple gods competing for the position of power, you're always going to have conflict.
Or for the real estate or whatever it is. Yeah.
Now, there's a political and a philosophical, I'm sorry, Trace, there's a philosophical problem with the founders establishing a religious clause that goes against the 10 Commandments right away, because they're trying to separate themselves from the rule of a king who's basically running roughshod over the colonies, telling them this is what you have to do. You're British citizens, you're properties of the crown, but in order for you to be British citizen, this is what you have to do, otherwise we're going to kill you. So they came up with the concept of the United States, which runs, as Ed just said, diametrically opposed to the concept of the 10 Commandments, because we're not accepting a ruler over our lives that is going to tell us what to do. So either you accept the 10 Commandments and be a country that is ruled by a god of some sort, or you accept the rule of the king and you're ruled by a person. If you don't want either one of those, then you have to make it so that everybody's free when it comes to this issue. And that's what they did.
And we kind of like it free.
Yeah, it's kind of a nice...
Let's move on to the second commandment. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image or any sketch, any likenesses of anything that is in heavens above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. And of course, all that's kind of fuzzy. I don't want to get into that too much.
Right,
but
they just boil it down to don't make a graven image.
That's
in spite
right.
of the fact that nobody knows what in the world a
What the hell it
graven...
looks like, right. Don't even try it, because you won't get
Well,
it.
So
Right?
no more images over your grave. But
I looked it up, and it says that a graven image, according to Webster, is an object of worship carved, usually from wood or stone, an idol.
right.
So that means all these crosses you see with JC depicted on it, isn't that the definition of a graven image?
Not only that, but all the statues of the saints and Mother Mary, right? All of those statues would seem to be graven images
Yeah.
because people pray to them.
And what fascinates me is that according to this mythology, the Christian God thought it was far more important to restrict you from making a graven image than it is to restrict you from enslaving somebody. Because there's none of the commandments prohibit slavery.
Right?
that makes perfect
Not only
sense,
that, but the punishment for a graven image, again, is
Capital.
wipe them all out.
Yeah.
It's not just capital punishment. It's wipe them out entirely, entire villages
This
and
is fascinating.
communities.
See, at that point, it's even better to be homosexual because for homosexual, they just got stoned. So if you got a good weekend with some weed out of it, then it's better to be a homosexual in the Bible than to
I
produce a
think you may have
graven image.
misinterpreted the word stoned in this.
Oh, did I get that one right?
Possibly.
Or I got that one wrong. Oh, okay.
I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. Well, see, all this time I thought that it meant something else.
I understand that would engender some enthusiasm.
Absolutely.
Third
I'm just
commandment,
saying
of
that it
course,
helps.
is blasphemy.
You know, if you're gonna read the Bible, it helps to be stoned. That's all I'm saying.
It's better not to read it the way we look at it. But the third one is blasphemy, Jim.
Yes,
Don't take the name of this God in vain, which people commonly do. Again, far more important than enslaving somebody. There's no restriction in the Ten Commandments or anywhere in Christianity
But
against enslaving people, which I
in-
think is
in
one of the
our
most
const-
reprehensible ways to treat humans.
it's right.
And
In fact, the only place that you have a problem in the commandments is if you actually are caught stealing a slave.
oh, I did not know that. That's okay. That's
Yes,
very.
yes.
You're right. That
Just-
makes
just-
sense.
Property,
Yes.
But in terms of of taking the Lord's name in vain, by contrast, our Constitution says, Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech, and that's an absolute, pretty much an absolute.
Mm-hmm.
There are some limits, of course, things like crying fire in a crowded theater.
Or if you're
Or-
a black player in the NFL.
Yeah,
Yeah.
those kinds of things.
Yep.
But
You-
those
you-
at least
you
can
can't
be
exercise.
tested in a
Yeah.
court of law,
Sure.
or at least contested. So
God, I hope
maybe
that's coming.
maybe they're not absolute, but they we have often felt as a society that should have the most liberal possible interpretation.
You've also got the issue, of course, of what people call hate speech. But of course, that is debatable, and that is something that also goes through the courts as well.
Sure.
Exactly.
Fourth one is the Sabbath day, which is curious because, as I understand it, this is the seventh day of the week when the God rested. Amazing, he can create entire universes, billions of galaxies, but still needs to rest. But anyway, he did.
very
and so
tiring.
the problem, of course, is that most Christians are calendar challenged, thinking that the seventh day is Sunday when it isn't. It's Saturday.
Saturday,
The Seventh-day
right.
Adventists recognize that. And do their worshiping on Saturday. Sunday is the first day of the week. But
Everybody
either
concedes
way, even in the 20th century, we could not have functional societies where whichever day we selected as the Sabbath, it would probably be Sunday, we can tell everybody to stop working. It's just impossible. We can't close our hospitals, our fire departments. We can't close our power plants down. Our military, we can't
Don't
shut
forget
it
the
all
most
down.
important of them all, 7-Elevens.
Come again?
Don't forget the most important one, 7-Elevens.
Yes,
You gotta keep those open all the time.
24/7.
Yeah.
So, it's a totally unrealistic commandment to think that we can prohibit anybody from working, and then to enforce it, you'd need to hire somebody to go to work and enforce
And
it. So
enforce
if
it,
anybody,
right.
so if poor Peter's down here running the station, like he's required to be by the Federal Communications Commission, somebody has to come out and arrest him, take him out, convict him, and kill him because he was working on the Sabbath.
Well, not only that, if you
But he's required
include
to.
if you include the Jewish religion, I mean, even striking a match or lighting a light switch is considered work and is prohibited on the Sabbath. Can you imagine really trying to live the entire country trying to live by
So
those
if you advance
regulations?
beyond that, though, if you advance beyond that, my father has a specific set of things that he does. He gets everything done on Friday and turns every light on in the house on Friday. So by the time that the time comes when he's not allowed to do anything, he technically is not doing any work. Everything's already turned on. So
No.
all he has to do is just survive the day.
Model of efficiency.
Hey, he just outsmarted God. What can you say? You know.
It should be mentioned that those kind of restrictions apply basically to the ultra-conservative wing of the Jewish faith. Most Jews are not so rigorous about its observance in the 21st century.
Well, we started out talking about the jealousy of the God and the acknowledgement that there were other gods. These first 4 commandments are all about honoring the God,
of course,
and the holy day for Him, and all this stuff. And this, of course, is what this God thinks is the most important thing for us to deal with. You know?
Let me just comment a little bit here about commandment number 4, as long as we're on it. We do have blue laws here in the U.S. that restrict things like businesses, notably liquor sales on Sunday. And, of course, the Jews, as we mentioned, have the Sabbath from Friday night to Saturday, and don't see Sunday as being the Sabbath at all. So interpreting this commandment is a bit up in the air. But even ignoring that, most of these blue laws have correctly been repealed. Not only that, but I suspect a lot of these politicians making claims about the 10 Commandments themselves work on Sundays or even Saturdays. So we do, in fact, have laws based on this commandment, even if they are unconstitutional. So I think maybe we can give this one commandment half a point, which is a total so far of half a point in favor of commandments being
upheld,
related to the Constitution.
Well, but in Exodus it says whoever does any work on the Sabbath it should be put to death. It's a capital crime to work, and I remember when I was a kid that most businesses were closed on Sundays, and now we've gotten to the point where not only do we sell alcohol, but they started at 11 o'clock to accommodate the sports games that come on that start typically at, the pregame shows start about noon, and so the city councils have adjusted the times because money trumps everything in a capitalist society.
It does. We even got businesses that are open on holidays.
Yeah.
Whereas in the past that would never have, especially like Thanksgiving or Christmas, something like that. Right. They're open now.
So that one, remembering the Sabbath day, is a commandment. The other 3 previous being restrictions, as is the one that follows it, honor thy father and thy mother, which, of course, is something that I think we would all agree is something that we shouldn't be commanded to do. Parents should be honored if they deserve it, if they warrant it. If my father was Charles Manson, I'm not sure how much I would honor him.
There's certainly a lot of parents out there that never deserve to be parents. I think you should have to be licensed to be a parent, for crying out loud.
Donald Trump. If these were my parents, I wouldn't necessarily honor these people. So why are we commanded to honor people that may not warrant it?
Under the legal system, under our Constitution, that is, the relationship between parent and child and people between each other is defined under the law in certain ways, and certain kinds of behavior is clearly prohibited. Things like people beating their children or leaving them in hot cars when the sun is out, and numerous other sorts of misbehavior which constantly grabs the evening news headlines.
Not to mention parents who constantly abuse their kids by not giving them medical attention under the guise of their religion.
That's right.
Which is just the stupidest thing you could do as a parent. Hey, I'm not going to take my kid to the hospital even though they're running a fever of 103 because my religion says they can't get a blood transfusion.
We're gonna pray it away.
Yeah, that hardly
would be
never works.
unconstitutional.
That hardly ever works. Yeah.
Well, we've got
Almost
5
never
more to
works.
go, and all 5 of them are the thou shalt nots. We're going to talk about them and continue, and then compare this and contrast it to the Bill of Rights to see if there's any similarity at all, if we can find any one of the 10 Commandments that somehow is incorporated into our Constitution. I'm going to take a short break and tell you about Atheists of Florida, which is the organization that puts this program on, and then we will continue here on the Tan Talk Radio Network. Atheists of Florida is a nonprofit membership organization founded in 1992. For over 25 years, Atheists of Florida has brought atheists together to address state-church separation issues, provide legal assistance in cases of religious discrimination in employment or educational institutions, help atheists meet others who want to live their lives free of religion, and produce the Atheist Forum. For membership information, visit our website at atheistofflorida.com, where you'll find our newsletters, annual reports, statement of purpose, and information about meetings and events. That's atheistofflorida.com. Our quote for the night from James Madison, father of the Constitution and fourth president of these United States. He said, "Religious bondage shackles and debilitates the mind and unfits it for every noble enterprise." I couldn't agree more.
Hear, hear.
5 through 10 is, "Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor, and thou shalt not covet anything that is thy neighbor's." None of these are embraced in our Constitution. Probably the closest thing you could come up with is typically in state laws, killing and stealing, which I think Carlin boiled it down to those two, didn't he, in his routine about the Ten Commandments?
Yeah.
That's all you got to know.
Are there even any federal laws against that?
No. There are.
But there's a good reason for that.
Yeah, I mean, there is now, but like when JFK was assassinated, Lee Oswald was not arrested by the federal authorities. It was considered a state crime, and he was arrested and would have been prosecuted by the state of Texas, and probably would have gotten off because I think he didn't do it. But that's another story.
I have a quick question. Can you imagine Benjamin Franklin knowing what we know about his past when he was in Paris and in France in general, including his extracurricular activities in the evenings with the ladies? Can you imagine him endorsing the commandment that says, "Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife"? Because he basically did that for about, 5 years?
Sure.
Or commit adultery.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, that's
So he
kind
was
of
not a big fan of that one, I
that's
guess.
pretty much the story of religion. It's do as I say, but not as I do, right?
Well, that couldn't be applied to Ben Franklin. He was not that big on religion, and for obvious reasons. He didn't follow it very
And
much.
since someone
And
who
he was
had-
a man of the Enlightenment.
Of the Enlightenment, and he had a big part in writing the Constitution, didn't
That's
he?
right. Well,
So-
not a big part, but some
he
part,
had,
yes.
He had an input in there.
That's right,
Right.
he did.
Well, the thing that gets me about the one restricting killing is that our military is the most efficient and effective killing machine in the world, right? And we honor the people that go out and kill on our behalf.
Heroes.
So if we were a Christian, exactly. We give
Yeah.
them parades and we fly jets overhead in their honor and so on. If we were a Christian nation, we wouldn't even have a military, because that's the purpose of a military, is to kill people, and we wouldn't honor and respect the people that do it. So how can we call ourselves a Christian nation when we spend more than the next 26 countries, combined on militarism, 25 of which are our allies?
Well, I'll tell you how this all came about. I think when these laws were written, they had to do with "you shall not kill other Hebrews, other
Probably
Jews,
right,
right?
yeah.
You
Right.
shall not steal from your neighbors, right? But that didn't necessarily include the tribe down the street.
Oh, yeah, they were fair game.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
they were fair game. Yep.
Well, but an argument might be made, reasonably it seems to me, that everyone has a right to self-defense. So in the defense of your own life, you can kill somebody who is aggressing against you. And that seems not unreasonable and should be protected by the laws of under our Constitution. But you're right here in that a truly Christian interpretation, a Christian society, would not be one that would embrace war as a method of solving national, international, or interpersonal problems, for that matter. So what the prohibition is would be more reasonably against murder. I mean, killing does take place, and occasionally it's warranted because of the self-defense idea. But murder, or homicide against another person to advance one's own interests without some corresponding aggression on the part of the other person, clearly would not be protected.
That's
don't
nice, but
forget-
then why didn't it say "thou shalt not commit murder"? Doesn't say that.
It should say
Leviticus
that.
says,
Yeah,
"He
it does.
that killeth any man Any man shall surely be put to death. Of course, you can kill women and
Women-
children.
Yeah, that was fine. Yeah.
Yes, and that
That's
was,
no problem. Only
Well,
men's lives were important.
The whole prospect of killing somebody was actually, in my opinion, it's less of a crime than what the Bible actually pertains to when it comes to enslaving other people. It creates this hierarchy that it's okay to enslave everybody else who's not a Hebrew if they're your enemy or you captured them in battle. It tells you specifically how you can enslave Jews versus non-Jews and how you can
That's right.
keep them forever and ever if they do, within 7 years, if they marry and have a child and whatever, and they want to stay with you, then you get to keep them forever. So it's not only the killing part that is really just this disgusting aspect
Yes.
of biblical prophecy from a God, but the fact that it creates this hierarchy as far as which human being is worth more.
and it does enable a certain frame of mind. But consider that this was a very unsophisticated, relatively underdeveloped society in many ways, philosophically included, and consequently these people had no other way. They didn't have prisons. They had no idea of what it meant to rehabilitate someone. So the only way they knew of dealing with someone who had violated the norms or the taboos or whatever of this society was, in fact, to
Get
kill
rid
them.
of them, right?
And then they would carry that further in when they had other tribes members of other tribes come in and try to conquer them, as they frequently did, back and forth. During this period of time, the whole Middle East was one big battlefield almost all the time.
That's
So
exactly
what's
why.
changed?
That's exactly why I'm
Well,
happy
it
that the
doesn't
U.S.
seem that way,
Constitution
but
is not
it's
based
gotten
on
bigger.
that.
Exactly.
That's exactly why I'm happy about that.
Well, if
that
you just
concept.
joined us, you're listening to the Atheist Forum here on the Tan Talk Radio Network. We're contrasting the Ten Commandments with the Bill of Rights to see if there's any connection between the two documents. We have found none so far. And if you'd care to join the conversation, 441-3000. We'll let you participate in the program. Tell us if we're right or wrong, or insult an atheist. You can find archives of our programs on our website at atheistsoflorida.com or at talk.aof.ngo. Let's go on to the seventh one, which I think is embraced
fun one.
warmly by President Donald Trump, right? Thou shalt not commit adultery. I think this is
Ignore it, Will.
Apparently, that's just a recommendation.
Well, it's based on the prenup because apparently his prenups are written in a way that within the first 5 years you can't be caught
I
committing adultery, and then after 5 years it doesn't matter because
That's
the
why
ex gets nothing.
Cohen is such a valuable attorney, right? But Leviticus 20:10 says, "The adulterer and the adulteress shall surely be put to death." So the Christian religion considers adultery a capital crime.
There goes half the Congress.
And
Well, and half the population as well,
Pretty
I
much.
think. Yeah.
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 And it's interesting to note that so far, of the 7 commandments that we have considered, all of them require capital punishment as the punishment for
Right.
their violation.
There's
no,
there's no increasing severity in the penalty for
No. They
you get
didn't
the
have
same
any
penalty for
concept.
stealing the stick of gum that you do for killing your neighbor's sheep.
Same
Basically,
thing. Same
yeah.
thing.
pretty much, yes.
It's, but we shouldn't. When we make these comparisons, we're speaking from the level of a much more sophisticated and civilized society. We would not ourselves recommend that someone who committed adultery be put to death, or someone who shoplifted an item from a jewelry store would be put to death, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, the people who recommend putting the Ten Commandments back into government, aren't they kind of recommending that, though?
They could be. They're
I
not
think
very
that-
clear on that.
I think the case could be really made that people who are so zealous about the Ten Commandments, they want to see it everywhere, on the courthouse walls, they want to see it in schools and everything. They're pretty much advocating for that kind of a punitive system.
And from an international perspective, they seem to enjoy the prospect of bringing on Armageddon by manipulating various players in the Middle East for their own biblically related purposes, so that they don't really have too much of an objection to mass slaughter as long as it accomplishes their ends, which is a tragedy, actually.
I think really that's one of the major dangers of instituting a theocracy is that they can throw back to these rules that were instituted thousands of years ago with very severe punishments and justify any law that they want to come up with, and the punishment that may go with it. So I think that's a huge danger in anybody suggesting that this country should become a theocracy.
Oh, yeah. I think those who advocate that are very idealistic, and they don't really realize what the consequences of that would be. The eighth one is thou shalt not steal. Again, stealing and murdering are not really embraced in the federal Constitution. They are defined as state law violations, and the states have or are able to define different elements of punishment, or what constitutes a misdemeanor, a felony, and so on.
And they're part of the penal code for at the state level, right?
Right. Yeah.
And it's
they're
good,
not in the federal.
It's good to know also
Constitution.
that the founders pretty much adopted what's called the British common law, as applied to most normal kinds of criminal considerations. So,
but what I hear that's so alarming to me is how many people think that these concepts came from Christianity. That the idea of murdering your neighbor or stealing his cow didn't exist until the Bible came up with it. You can find cultures all over the world that never heard of Christianity or Jesus Christ, and they lived the same way. They didn't condone stealing and murdering and so on. They were able to put together fundamental laws that kept their cultures functional and embrace them, and they didn't need any religion.
Well, that's because every culture has to come up with a way of treating the members within its society to make it get along, because we are social beings. We need sociality, and you have to be able to get along with your neighbors. And if you're stealing and murdering, you're not getting along with your neighbors. So every society is going to come up with a similar rule.
Yeah, I think you can make actually a case based on what you just said, Tracy, that if a society was not completely against the concept of murder, we would have never heard of them because they would have died out.
yes,
They would have murdered each other a long time ago, right?
Good point.
Stealing, I think, is the only one, though, that isn't a capital crime according to the Bible. But you're supposed to restore double or give all the substance of your house or whatever. But it doesn't matter. The point is that the concept of stealing is nothing unique to Christianity or any religion. It's a fundamental concept that humans have when they form any kind of a society.
Don't take stuff that doesn't belong to you.
Exactly.
In terms of punishments,
concept,
though, they were
right?
kind of all over the place. For many things, especially minor thefts, they had excessive fines or slavery. And in rare cases, such as stealing slaves, capital punishment. And thieves caught in the right are to be executed.
Now, did the slave have a
Caught in the night, I'm
say-so
sorry.
in that whole judicial process?
Now, what do you think?
Did they ask the slave, and okay, so we're going to execute this guy who just stole you, so you're free to go. Do you want the option to go
only.
free to go?
Right.
Do you want to return to your previous master and continue serving? They didn't have that option.
I like the fact that thieves caught in the night could be executed. That means if you're going to be a burglar, don't be a cat burglar. Do it in
during
the
the
daytime.
daytime. Absolutely.
Ninth commandment, thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. We have a president who is now generally conceded to be a pathological liar. And yet the punishment for lying, if the witness be a false witness, you shall do unto him as he had thought to do unto his brother. What the hell does that mean? But there's no constitutional restriction against lying. We know that, or we'd hardly have
Perjury in
any.
the court of law is the only exception to that I can think of. But again, that's part of the
Exactly.
the penal system.
Yeah, federal law can be
Right.
established that if you lie to the FBI under oath, that's construed as a crime.
But that's
right?
not a constitutional issue.
That's not a constitutional
Right.
issue, right?
Right.
That would be
It's
known as
just
perjury.
Federal
actually.
law comes in, and that law is held to constitutional muster, which is what the constitutional is. It's basically the rule book for making laws. It doesn't establish the laws like the Ten Commandments do. So that's just one more element where the two are completely completely
Opposite,
unrelated.
right.
And the last one, of course, thou shalt not covet.
This is my favorite.
That's the foundation of capitalism, right? Keeping up with the Joneses.
This is my favorite because this is
That's Madison Avenue's bread and butter.
this is thought crime.
That's Case. There goes Case Street right there. If you can't covet anything, then you don't need lobbyists for anything.
I
right?
mean, this is Orwellian, isn't it? Don't you
Right.
think?
It can be. The case certainly can be made for that. Yeah.
It's an attack on consumerism.
And it's nice to
Consumer Reports
see,
would fold up. If
although it is nice to see that capitalism does trump, no pun intended, religion when it comes to certain things, because being open on Sunday or Saturday is certainly overriding the Sabbath thing. And so it is nice to see that there are some economic systems that actually can overcome the ingrained religious systems that people think this country was founded upon.
And since to covet something is actually an emotion.
Sure.
Now, how can you outlaw an emotion? I mean, that's
Well,
ridiculous. on
Well,
its
Joseph
face.
Stalin tried to do a good.
It's back to what
Try
I think
it,
where
yeah.
we started is that if any of us were going to establish 10 fundamental rules for a society to live by, we would reject most of these and replace them with we can't enslave people, we can't abuse women, we can't put children in sweatshops, things that would really preserve human dignity and equality. None of those aspects are found in Christianity.
And I think if you were to sit down and write 10 specific commandments for a population to follow, we certainly wouldn't come up with this kind of BS. We would come up with something that's more reasonable. Like
What I
number
just
one.
said?
Of course, that's.
Oh, okay.
But,
I'm kind of reiterating. I'm
myself.
sorry.
Okay.
So, I would probably put something in there about thou shalt not have special underwear that you have to wear for special occasions, like the Mormons do.
Well, at
You
all
know?
times they have
I mean,
those.
yeah.
You're not wearing special underwear?
Okay.
Magic underwear.
Magic underwear.
magic.
Right.
Oh.
Magic underwear.
Well, it
That
is
sounds
magical,
even better.
but, in a
I
different
think
sense.
the Pastafarians have it right. The spaghetti monster has not a list of 10 commandments, but 9 I'd really rather you didn't.
Yeah. Okay.
I would probably outlaw animal abuse.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we could think of 10 things that probably would be completely unrelated to these, other than murdering and stealing, which again are just fundamental rules of any society. There's nothing special about them. The Christianity has no unique claim to them.
I don't think you can have a society without having those particular
Exactly.
rules. Yeah.
Let's quickly then look at the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, which curiously is also 10 items, coincidentally, and see if they sound anything like the 10 Commandments. The First Amendment, of course, being the most prized and probably the most recognized, because it gives us our rights to speech, the press, our right to protest the government. And really these rights are, I think they're telling the government that you can't interfere with us. When you are given power over us, there are certain things that you cannot take away from us. Habeas corpus, even though Lincoln did. Trump would love that. Donald Trump would love to be able to arrest and jail anybody who speaks critically of him, anybody who writes anything critically of him.
Yeah.
But we're
Well, that's too easy
protected
to
from
do.
him by the Constitution.
He wants
which
to
is why
restrict
it's
the
such a
First
big-
Amendment
Yeah.
It's
tremendously.
too easy to do. He basically says something on an hourly basis that you can disagree with
Yes.
on a fundamental level.
We're all familiar with Amendment 2 because it's always talked about every time there's a school shooting, well-regulated militia, which we did not actually have when the country was founded, right? So we had to be sure that if we needed to bring a group together to form a military for defense, that they were already armed, because the government, wouldn't be able to do it or get the arms to them fast
Now, that
enough.
one I
but-
can get behind. Everybody should have the right to own a musket.
Right,
That's
exactly.
it.
In fact, it was all
Right.
but a requirement.
Right.
The Amendment 3 is obsolete because this is the one that says that no soldier can be quartered in any house without consent of the owner, nor in time of war, but in a manner be prescribed by law. Well, in this day and age, that's totally obsolete. The government isn't going to start putting soldiers in our house. And if we're at war, we're going to be overseas anyway. We're not going to be
More than
having,
likely.
we're not, who can invade us? Who can get across these huge oceans and bring the supply lines that would be required to invade this country? Back then, a realistic concern of the government. If the Spanish decided to invade St. Augustine, they had to put together a defense. They had to be armed and ready to stand up to them. No longer. So Amendment 3, we could just get rid of that.
Not to mention the fact that the last time the Spaniards tried to put an armada together, it sank at sea in the British Channel. So they're not going to be much of a threat.
4, I think, is really a valuable one. It's the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures. Not to be violated, no warrant shall issue unless you have probable cause. So this really protects us from rogue police departments that want to
run
invade
amok.
Exactly,
Yes.
and that's extremely valuable.
Not always
I think it should be
observed.
the second one, but
Right.
as long as it's in there, that's important.
Not always observed. My understanding is that if you're driving across country and you have a large amount of cash on you and somebody pulls you over,
Yeah.
they can confiscate
Yeah.
that with the assumption that you're up to no
Right.
good with that cash.
But here again-
it is correct, but it's also
the-
very controversial, and it is being tested in the courts as it should be.
But again,
Right.
this isn't anything that you see in the Ten Commandments. We don't have any expression of personal privacy or civil liberties or women's rights or children's rights expressed in the commandments. The commandments never order the government to give us civil liberties and freedom and privacy. It takes all that away from us. So there's no connection between the two. We all know the Fifth Amendment, right? You don't have to testify against yourself. Again, a very valuable one. And then it gets into if you're charged with a capital crime, how the government must prosecute. They can't throw you in jail and leave you there for a long time. They've got to define the crime. They've got to present the witnesses. You have the right to a lawyer and a trial.
Speedy trial.
Exactly. So this is really, just a tantamount fundamental right for us as citizens. Again, nowhere expressed in Christianity. 6 also deals with criminal prosecutions, speedy and public trial, and impartial jury. Of course, one of the films coming to Tampa Theater this summer is To Kill a Mockingbird, where we see a typical example of where that didn't happen, because wouldn't a jury of a black person,
A jury of your peers?
would
Yeah.
be black people, right,
Yeah.
or women.
Yeah.
But none of that happened, and then we saw the results of it. So it's taken us a long time to really embrace this and use it the way it was not originally intended, but should have been.
You know what's sad about
Indeed.
the penal part of the Bill of Rights is that a lot of people don't know where the Miranda warning came from. They have no idea this was an actual person.
Yeah.
They
yeah.
think it's a description of some kind.
And it could have been called the Oswald rights, because he couldn't
Could
get
have
a
been.
lawyer,
Right.
and was interviewed without counsel.
Well,
But he was assassinated.
It seems to me that all of these rights that we have are accumulating to us at a tremendous rate. The international Code of Human Rights, as delineated by the United Nations in 1949, specifies a very great amplification of such rights. And as we go through time, rights accumulate along with our capabilities, as I mentioned before, in that we can, every person should, it is felt, reasonably have access to the internet. Every person should have enough food to eat, certainly. Every person should have a place to stay, a roof over their head, sufficient clothing, etc., etc.
Police
These
protection.
Police protection.
Yeah, these are all material rights
But I'd like to-
that over time we've accumulated for ourselves.
I'd like to point out, though, that these rights come about in spite of the religious right or the religious things like the Ten Commandments
right.
and things like that. Not because of them, but in spite of them. So going back to the Ten Commandments would be a huge step
That's
taken
right,
backwards.
and then that's the crucial thing,
Right.
going back.
Right.
Because the Ten Commandments and the rules of Hammurabi or the Code of Hammurabi.
Well, maybe when they're talking
and
about
such
MAGA,
things-
they're talking about the 1650s instead of the 1850s. When they want to make America great again, they want to go back to the 1600s.
Yeah. But
Perhaps
see,
the
but to me,
Enlightenment continues.
When you talk about rights to food and housing, that's like saying you have the right not to have a hurricane hit you. What happens when you turn on the tap and no water comes out? Because in South Africa, the reservoir is running dry. You have a
Exactly.
right to whatever the government decides it can provide for you.
That's right.
Okay, but it's not an inherent.
No,
You know,
can't
right.
make the universe.
Right.
The universe has no obligation to fulfill your
Exactly.
desires.
Let's
But you
cover
should have
these.
the
Deserve them or
right as a
not.
human being to have moral rights from other human beings
That's
that they
right.
should
That's
respect, and
where it is
everybody
compelling.
should be respected based on
Sure.
moral rights.
We want everyone to be recognized as a human being,
Right.
and
At the
to the
very
extent
least.
possible,
At the very least.
provide for their
Right.
needs.
Well, let's cover the last four quickly as we can, because 7 and 8 refer to suits of common law and the right to a trial by jury, even in a civil case. 8 deals with excessive bail not being required, so that you can't be arrested on a misdemeanor and be hit with a $10 million bail because the mayor's assistant doesn't like you or whatever. Cruel and unusual punishment is covered in 8. Neither of these, of course, have anything to do with the Ten Commandments. And then 9 and 10 refer to states with respect, the rights of states with respect to the federal government and what they can do.
Certainly,
And of course,
certainly 8, having to do with cruel and unusual punishment, is not reflected in the commandments in any way, shape, or form, because it seems the punishment in the commandments are all cruel and unusual.
You
Very
have
well
one
said.
punishment.
In our terms,
put
yes.
to death. That's
Absolutely.
it. You have the right to be put to death.
Well, then it
That's
isn't.
the punishment in
It's
Ten
cruel, but
Commandments.
not unusual.
It's not unusual. It happened all
common.
the time.
But
Right.
we're constantly testing these things. In the paper today,
What,
for
the
instance,
Ten
was
Commandments
the story
to be put
of
to death?
a story of a young man who was sentenced to pay $65 million. He's 18 years old. $65 million in restitution because he started a forest fire, and it burned, did a lot of damage and so forth. But for an 18-year-old to pay $65 million?
Where's he going to come up with that kind of money?
Good question. But
better
that
have
seems
a good
like
credit limit.
cruel and unusual, at least certainly unusual at any rate.
Maybe he can talk to Bernie Madoff to raise the funds.
But again, I think, we can see clearly there is absolutely no correlation between anything in Christianity, especially its 10 Commandments, with our Bill of Rights and our Constitution. And if we go through the rest of the Constitution, it's primarily the structure of the government and how people are elected and how they serve and how we determine how many representatives that we all have. And this whole concept of a representative government is totally foreign to Christianity, which advocates a kingdom. And I can think of no difference between a king and a dictator. It's essentially the same person. You don't have civil rights or liberties when you have a king or a dictator.
Change
They
one
make
word
them
in
up.
that sentence. Change from Christianity to Muslim.
And you're in the same
And
place.
you're in the same place. There's no difference. And then all the Christians are up in arms about it. Why are they so opposed to a Muslim caliphate being established in the United States, but they're okay with a Christian? Because you have the right God to worship. That's the
right.
only difference.
And not only this, we have mentioned this many times on this program. There are only 2 mentions. There's no mention of God whatsoever in the Constitution,
None.
and there's only the mention of the word religion twice, and it's both in the negative. It's in the First Amendment, of course, as we've been discussing, and it's also that you will not have a religious test for running for office.
And that extends to serving on a jury or being a notary public, any kind of civil service job. That's why when Kim Davis abused her position in, I think it was in Kentucky or Tennessee, to deny a marriage certificate to
license,
homosexuals,
yeah.
she was using her religion to interfere with government. She should have been immediately dismissed from duty because she clearly was trying to put a religious test into government. She doesn't understand the Constitution. The Constitution is held by the courts to supersede religious beliefs every time. That's all the time we have for the forum tonight. I want to thank all of you for being here and giving us such good input. Next week, we hope to have Melissa Erickson as our guest. She's the co-founder and executive director of the Alliance for Public Schools. That educates, engages, and inspires families and communities to collectively support high-quality public schools and the children who attend them. What she has to say about the status of public schools in our state today is absolutely spine-chilling. So I hope you'll be able to join us now, along with Lost, Tracy, Jim, and me. I'm Ed Golly, reminding you if the story seems a little too implausible to be true, don't believe it just because somebody wrote it down.
Make them prove it.
To the Atheist Forum. To learn more about Atheists of Florida, visit our website at atheistofflorida.com. Continue the discussion on our website, talk.aof.ngo. Join us again next Sunday for another edition of the Atheist Forum here on Tan Talk 1340.